ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Hi, I'm Julia Baird.
And I'm Jeremy Fernandez, and we just want to let you know about our podcast. It's called Not Stupid.
Every week we chat about the stories you're obsessed with and the news you might have missed. It's called Not Stupid, and you can find it on the ABC Listen app.
He writes pretty decent cookbooks, but Jamie Oliver's sidestep into children's novels hasn't gone so well. The celebrity chef has had to halt sales of his latest book, Billy and the Epic Escape, around the world over its portrayal of First Nations Australians. Today, writer and poet Jeanine Leane on how Jamie Oliver got it so wrong. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily.
Wiradjuri Marang, Yuandu Jeanine, Wiradjuri Yina. Hello, my name's Jeanine and I'm a Wiradjuri woman. And I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you, speaking to you today from Ngunnawal, Ngambri country, Canberra, and acknowledge lands never ceded and pay my respects to elders past and present.
Thanks, Jeanine. All right, Jeanine, let's get down to business. Jamie Oliver's second children's book.
Celebrity chef Jamie Oliver has become embroiled in controversy after criticism that his new children's book stereotypes Indigenous Australians and trivialises their experiences.
Billy and the Epic Escape featured an Aboriginal girl with mystical powers living in foster care who's abducted from her home in Central Australia. Some First Nations leaders have labelled the book offensive, saying
it's been pulled from publication. That's a big deal, right? It's not often that books are pulled from the shelves.
No, and it's not often enough sometimes that books might be pulled from shelves. It is a big deal, but it's no bigger deal than it should be, because this misrepresentation in this way, this kind of cultural misrepresentation, leaves a legacy that's lasting and damaging.
Yeah, okay. So this book, Billy and the Epic Escape, is its title. It's a 400-page fantasy novel which is set largely, of course, in the UK, but there's this one chapter which has caused all of the controversy, and that is set in Australia. So just tell me about that.
The chapter itself that's set in Australia, I mean, it is problematic on a number of fronts. The name of the chapter, To Steal a Child, constructs a young Aboriginal character, an Aboriginal girl called Ruby, with mystical powers, who lives in foster care in Central Australia. Presumably the setting is Alice Springs, Mabantwa. She is abducted from her home, and I understand that this is a fictionalised account of such, but think of the deep insensitivity of it and the fact that Jamie Oliver has chosen that this is an Aboriginal child. For those of us with First Nations backgrounds, it is deeply offensive and hurtful, because this country is still reckoning with its history of stolen generations. This is obviously him kind of carrying a colonial overhang into the whole situation, that you might even consider that it was okay to do that.
It's innocent enough, that chapter, if you have absolutely no idea about Australian history, that you have no idea about the stolen generations in this country.
But it's completely sinister and ugly and so wrong if you do. From my perspective, having no idea about Australian history is not a good enough excuse anymore. And then just that idea of, the mystical powers, like Aboriginal culture is not magic or superstition. It is realism. It is a real set of beliefs that exist, and they are not to be trivialised in this way either. It's a major kind of cultural infringement here. But Jamie Oliver's not the only one, and it's an ongoing problem. And I think because Jamie Oliver is so well known, so famous, this is a flashpoint.
Yeah.
But, it should be an ongoing point of discussion, and, before any authors can even think about telling a story of otherness, there's a whole lot of work they have to do on themselves. Jamie Oliver should have asked, and all people should ask, where do I get my assumptions from about Aboriginal people? Did I learn it from a colonial textbook? Because if I did, it's probably highly unreliable and totally misrepresentative. And then when I bring this erroneous and faulteous knowledge into my representations, what am I doing?
Well, of course, First Nation leaders here have taken great offence, as have you. The complaints were led by the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Education Corporation. So what did it go about doing? Because it succeeded, of course, in getting this book withdrawn.
Yes, they would have been monitoring in that, and, to their credit, acted very, very quickly to ask for it to be pulled. That body was speaking for many, if not all of us, when they raised those concerns, absolutely, because in the aftermath of that, there were other First Nations writers, scholars, who all made a comment about the inappropriateness of this book. And inappropriate, even that word doesn't quite cut it. I mean, it's a major kind of cultural infringement here.
Well, Jamie Oliver did put out a statement saying he was devastated by this.
Yes, he did.
He's apologised. Now, the publisher, Penguin Random House, it also issued a statement acknowledging that there was no due diligence when it came to this chapter, that there was no what they call authenticity reading of this chapter. What is that?
Yeah, authenticity reading, as they've used the term. People tend to use the term here, sensitivity reading or cultural sensitivity reading. It is ideally where they would ask, the publisher would employ someone who is an expert in the field and someone who is, in this case, a First Nations person, to read, well, the chapter at the very least, but ideally the whole book, because you need to kind of see what the context is, to look for all the things that Jamie Oliver has done here that are highly offensive and appropriative and misrepresentative. But I want to say a word on that. Authenticity is a problematic word because, Aboriginal culture is exceedingly diverse, and that's another transgression in Jamie Oliver's book. I understand that some parts of the dialogue is written in Gamaluroi language, whereas the book is set in Central Australia. So that sort of dangerous homogenisation of the diversity of First Nations culture across the length and breadth and whole geography of Australia and surrounding islands. So authenticity is something that only the communities can decide. Say, for example, a Wiradjuri story, they should have a Wiradjuri sensitivity reader. And think about the immense cultural labour and some of the I've read some terrible stuff as a sensitivity reader. Can be quite harrowing. And so there's a huge cultural load there involved in even in a sensitivity read. And I think that's something that people don't consider behind the scenes even when they're thinking about these kind of doing this in the first place, just how much labour is involved for themselves as an author to do the work, to do the consultation. Like the first thing Jamie and his publisher should have done was spoken to Aboriginal people.
I guess, Jeanine, the question is whether a white man, British author living in England can really write about the experience of Indigenous Australians, or is it a point where at this moment in time only Indigenous Australians can tell Indigenous stories, even if they're fiction?
There is an extent to which only First Nations people can tell certain First Nations stories, even if they choose to use fiction as a tool. It is important to represent diversity, but you don't represent it from a knowing position, and you never, never, never voice a First Nations person if you're a non-Indigenous person.
So, Jeanine, if Jamie Oliver and his team go about fixing the mistakes, rewriting that chapter, can it be republished and put out again, do you think? Or is that it?
Not like that. I mean, I don't think Jamie Oliver really should be representing First Nations people because he doesn't have the background. And just, is he going to come here or with his publisher and do more consultation about it? And, an important question to ask is, why do you want to write about, a good advocate makes themselves redundant, and people often say, but I want to write about First Nations culture just to make people aware or put it on the map. Well, why don't you go to the people and give the people the space to do their own story?
So back to the drawing board, Jamie Oliver.
Yeah.
Good. Write a different book.
Yeah, look, write a different book. Stick to something that you know. And in answer to your question, can only First Nations people tell First Nations stories? That very much depends on the context, the story, the relationship of the person telling the story to the person or community or communities from which the story will take a setting. There's a hell of a lot of work to be done before you even think about writing another culture, I guess, is the main point. His stereotypes in this book just reek of colonial misrepresentation through the cultural transmission of bad literature that is perpetuated about us, not by us.
Jeanine Leane is a writer and poet and an associate professor in creative writing at the University of Melbourne. This episode was produced by Cara Jensen-McKinnon and Sydney Peed. Audio production by Anna John. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hooley. Thanks for listening.
Auckland Harbour, 1985. 2 explosions destroyed a Greenpeace ship, the Rainbow Warrior. Her last voyage would be the evacuation of the people of the tiny atoll of Rongelap in the Marshall Islands. Across 6 episodes, discover the story of a people dispossessed, the legacy of nuclear testing in the Pacific, and one man's fight for justice. The Last Voyage of the Rainbow Warrior. Find it in the ABC Listen app.